Welcome to the Spunky Spirit Podcast. I'm your host, psychic medium Carrie Muggs. This is where we learn all things spirit, everything from spiritual gifts, awakenings, ghosts, aliens, and starseeds. Nothing is untouchable, but always fun and spunky. I am honored to be on this spiritual journey with you, so make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode.
Hello, and welcome to this week's podcast, Spunky Spirit Podcast. I am your host, Carrie Muggs, and this week we are going to talk about time and time lapses and how spirit talks about time or the relevance of time in the spirit world and different types of paranormal activities with time. So the crazy thing about doing these video is that you can see my mess. You can see my notes are right here. And so, but you know what? It is what it is. And I've had lots of people reach out and say that they liked this part. So we're just going to go with it. We're just going to pretend that you are next to me in the next room or right across from me on the table. And we're going to talk about these different time things. Now, I've always been interested in the way time shifts because ever since I was little, when I've had this gift and seen, different spirits, I've never had an experience of a time slip or a time, when even people who get abducted who say they were abducted by aliens say that they forget time or they don't know how much time has passed when they came back. And I've always been interested in, like, Back to the Future was a great movie when I was coming up, and I always liked The Time Traveler's Wife, but my favorite was Quantum Leap, and with Sam Beckett. I loved that. I don't know if it was because he was just so cute or if it's because I loved the way he slipped into different times of different people's lives. So when spirits come to me in readings, they will explain to me that time is different for them. So it's almost like, and I don't dare really say this, it's like they don't really miss us because they can be with us at any time they want to be. And also, too, it's like being 10 minutes to them is like 10 years for us, which is kind of, so I'm going to kind of talk about the Bible a little bit. There's different times that they don't really talk about time travel in the Bible, but they do talk about in Second Peter, or there's a verse that says, "But do not overlook this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord, one day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day." So that's been kind of interesting too. And I've always been interested in it because when spirits will come through, they'll say, time is not linear for us. Time is not past, present, and future. It's kind of all incumbent. And I was listening to a podcast that Cindy Keza did. She was a guest on a podcast, and she kind of said the same thing. She's come to believe that this kind of all incumbents, it's all happening at once. And she doesn't know how to explain it. And I don't know how to explain it, but that's just what I've been taught, or that's what I've been told by spirit. It just kind of happens all at once. And Tesla also has known to quote this: "I could see the past, the present, and the future at the same time." So when Tesla was doing his work or his like string theory or physics work, it was interesting because he kind of had the same thought, or the same thought, that it was all kind of happening all at the same time, which doesn't make sense to us. But here's what I wanted to read to you out of a book called Slips in Time and Space by Rosemary Guiley. She did a lot of work, wrote a lot of books in the paranormal. And so in this book, there's an interview with Michio Kaku. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but editor or Phyllis Glade did this. And I want you to just listen to this because it's so interesting, his perception and how our perception is. And so I thought I was going to read it because it kind of wowed me. I was like, oh my gosh, that's totally it. So he says, "We live in a 3-dimensional world, length, width, and height. And we also have a 4th dimension, which is time. But anyone who talks about time, higher dimensions, is sometimes called a crackpot or crazy. Now, when I was a child, I used to go to the Japanese tea garden in San Francisco. When I, okay, where there are fish swimming in a shallow pond. I imagined being a fish myself. And if I was a fish, I could travel forward, backward, left, and right. But that concept of up and down made no sense because the pond was my only universe. So I imagined there was a scientist who would say, bah humbug, there are no other dimensions other than forward and backward and left and right. There's no such thing as up and there's no such thing as down. What you see is what you get. If you cannot measure it, it doesn't exist. Then I imagined as a child reaching down and grabbing the fish, lifting it into the world of up, hyperspace, and third dimension. Out of the third dimension, what would he see? He would see a world where beings move without fins, a new law of physics, beings breathing without water, a new law of biology. Then I would put the fish back into the pond and what stories he would tell, a universe beyond the universe. Well, today, many physicists believe that I get physicists and psychics mixed up. Well, today, many physicists believe that we are the fish. We spend all of our lives in a three-dimension, going forward and backward, left and right, and up and down. But anyone who talks about another unseen dimension is considered a crackpot or a crazy. Well, not anymore. The largest machine that science has ever built, the Large Hadron Collider, 27 miles in circumference, costing 8 billion euros, about $10 billion, will be turned on, and we hope to get evidence of the 11th dimension, one of time and of space. This was in 2009. He did this. But I thought how interesting that the fish's perception is of the water going left to right and forward and backward, but never up and down. And so when you kind of take that up and down, we're kind of in the same thing too. When you get taken out of our world, it's a whole new world with lots of different things. And so that's why I'm always saying, you never know. You never know what is out there or what can happen. And when spirits come through all the time and say, time is different for us. Time is not linear. And also too, they talk about how they're at a frequency rate. And so they can be with different people, that their loved ones, at the same time. So my dad can be with me and with my brother at the same time. Some of his frequency can be with me and some of it could be with my brother. It's just like a radio station. So I just think that is so, so interesting. And so they also say too, that, they don't feel like they miss us because we're going to be there like in 10 minutes to them. To us, it seems like 10 years, but to them, it seems like just like 10 minutes. And so I find that fascinating. And because of that time difference, there's also some paranormal anomalies that happen called time slips. And so when people see, just like when people see spirits or see ghosts or have different experiences, some people experience time slips. And what those are is when you're doing your day-to-day chores or you're doing your day-to-day stuff, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a different dimension, or you find your surroundings to be different, or you find what's going on around you different. And lots of people have experienced times where they've been doing something and they either fall asleep or they pass out, and then they wake up at a different parallel universe at a different time. And those stories have been kind of cool. Those are what this book by Rosemary Ellen Guiley is about, Slips in Times and Space. And she talks about how time is not fixed. This book is awesome if you want to hear different stories about different experiences that people have had. And there was a couple that went on a trip with another couple, 4 of them, and they stopped at this awesome cavern or tavern, this hotel thing, and they thought it was kind of different, but they didn't really think anything of it. And when they kind of spent like 2 nights there, they thought it was like old time, like even the doors didn't lock. They thought it just was like, but they thought it was maybe themed, or they thought that it was like older dressers and like no mirrors. And so they even had to like take chairs to like both the doors because it was weird that it had no door locks on the doors. And then when they went to go pay, it was only like $3. And he was like, no way. And I don't know if this was a time when there was no cash or I mean no credit cards, but I can't remember the details of the story. And they just talked about how different it was and how it was awesomely themed. And then they went about on their trip and they kept going and they did more things. And then on their way back, they wanted to stop at the same place and it wasn't there. They looked and looked and they couldn't find it. And so they asked people about it and they were like, that was a lot. They did some history or somebody told them that that hotel or that tavern was there like long time ago, that it hadn't been there for a really long time. So they kind of just let it go. And then when I think that they took pictures, there was like the tavern wasn't in the background or something like that. It was just the craziest story. And I remember when I did the podcast on the Yellowstone ghosts, same thing. A guy met a woman that was sitting at a picnic table and she had been a maid at one of the hotels and he had gotten to talk to her and then he took her to work. He drove her to work. He gave her a ride to her where she worked. And then the next day he went to go get her or he went to go talk to her again or say goodbye to her and the hotel was gone. And he had asked people around, they're like, that hotel has not been there for a really long time. So these are what we call time slips or time anomalies. And my favorite is Time Slips was with Sam Beckett. I watched this all the time growing up, Quantum Leap. I think the reason why this was my favorite is because he'd go to different times and he'd go to different, and he would be put in place of somebody else. So he would be put in somebody else's life and he would try and make that life better for them or that experience better for them. The show is called Quantum Leap and I loved it so much. And the thing I loved about the most is at the end on their final episode, I think he meets with God and he kind of feels like he failed. Sam feels like he failed. He feels like he didn't change the world at all. Oh my gosh, and at the end, God says, well, that's how you do change the world is one person at a time. The person that you helped or the person that you changed for them, it domino effect. And then that changed their perspective or that changed their life. And so he said, you change the world by changing one person at a time. And that really got me because that's like a whole nother story. But that time story, that was my favorite. And I do admit I watched the time traveler's wife and it made me cry. It really cried because he had no control over when he would leap. And I guess Sam Beckett didn't either, but he would show up in different times of his life and his wife's life and his girlfriend's life. So he'd show up at the wedding and then disappear. And then they even have a child and he would show up at different times of her life too. And that kind of just goes to show that maybe we don't have this all under control. We don't have control of time in our dimension, in our third dimension, but in other dimensions, they might. And I read lots of books by Dolores Cannon where she has done hypnotisms on people and they have remembered having time slips. There was one that she did with a hunter and he was hunting in the forest and his complete surroundings changed and even the animals around him changed and he didn't understand it. He actually killed one of the animals and took it back through another dimension back into his own time. And it was the weirdest animal that he'd ever seen. And it wasn't something that was in our time, in our time or in our time well. So it also goes back to like aliens and Bigfoot. Like, do they use the time as their kind of thing? So it just is so interesting to me because it all kind of connects. And I've said this a million times. And a lot of you guys could be like, oh my gosh, this is the craziest thing ever. And you know what? I don't care. So you know what? Take what resonates with you and what doesn't, and just kind of go with it. It's just kind of fun and it's magical. And I just think there's something about it. Time changes. And there's lots of different shows about it too, like the passenger plane, where they all go up and their flight was an hour, but when they land, they've been gone for 5 years. It's just, where are those time portals or where are those time slips? And one of the really interesting ones is, when we go back to talking about past, present, and future, The Conjuring. I don't know. I've never really watched the show, but I did listen to an interview that Chris Fleming did with, um, I think one of the mediums that were there. And she said that what she thinks happened is that this house that they were in was in a time portal. It was in a portal, some sort of time portal or time vortex or parallel thing that we just talked about. And she said that things were going on, past, present, and future was going on at the same time. And really sensitive people could see that. And so they thought they were seeing ghosts, which makes really interesting for paranormal investigations too, right? Like, so if we see a ghost, are we seeing residual, not residual, but residue, spiritual residue from them? Or are we seeing something that maybe they see us as a ghost? So if we go and if we're on a, paranormal, she talks about that in one of these stories too. One of the guys is he's in a hallway and he sees this like old soldier guy passing him in the hall, and he walks into what he thinks is a door. The ghost is seen opening the door and going in, but in reality there was no door there. But he found out later in the past there had been a door there. And so he's like, was I a ghost to him? Because the ghost kind of looked at him like he was weird. So were they in a time portal, or was he seeing residual or residue, spiritual residue from, I don't even remember what to call it, but you guys know what I'm talking about if you listen to me enough. And so I thought that was really interesting because what if we are what if we are seeing something, we're in a time warp, like on the house and the Conjuring. And what happened is sensitive spirits would see these other spirits, sensitive people would see these other spirits going around, and they thought they were ghosts, when she thinks in reality it was a time portal and that people could see things going on all at the same time. And what happened is a medium who didn't kind of know what they were doing went and conjured something that was maybe not so great. And I don't know what the specifics are in that, but that was her opinion. And I just thought it was interesting because how many times do we see spirits or ghosts or paranormal stuff, and it's all about time, and it's all about being there at a different time. So I thought it's just one of those things that you think, okay, there's more to this. And I want to try and figure it out. If you guys know me or you just know it, kind of like, I think my first time that I thought this was the craziest concept was during The Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe, The Lion, and by C.S. Lewis. I think, yeah, it was C.S. Lewis. And he wrote about how teenagers were in this home, this big, huge home, and they found a portal through a wardrobe to a different dimension or a different time. And they thought they were gone for years. They thought they were gone. They were all grown up, but they came back through the portal in the woods again. And the guy that had been watching him said, you'd only been gone for like 10 minutes. And so to me, also another one was A Wrinkle in Time that I really, really liked. I really like to follow Tesla. And I do believe he kind of had a thing on time travel. And I think he was onto something, but I think that people got a hold of it after he passed, and we will kind of never see. I think it has to do with energy. It has to do with all of that stuff. It's kind of all incumbent. And I do believe that, the paranormal, if there are alien race, if there are, well, we already know if there are because the government has said so, and if there are those types of animals and like Bigfoot or aliens, that they do use this time portal or they do use this time thing. I totally think that that's kind of how they do it. And it's interesting, they've made lots of movies about time machines and going back to time, and we've seen on the internet lots of photos of people who have taken photos and somebody in the photo doesn't belong because their clothing is different or something that they're wearing is different. And I think that that's completely fascinating too. I just really feel like this is capable. There's just so much that we don't know out there that this can happen. And it's interesting because we feel like, I remember too, and I really fully believe this. I remember being told when I was part of a certain religion that they said you could take eternity and make a big long string out of it. And the time that we spend on earth is one little tiny knot in that string. And I still believe that that has some truth to it because I believe we are eternal. I believe our souls are eternal. And I believe that time continues. And I do believe in past lives and future lives. I just kind of believe that they're all happening at the same time, not linear, like past, present, and future. So I thought it was really interesting. You will really, if you are into time traveling or time slips or time portals, then you will really like this book by Rosemary Ellen Guiley. I think she's there's just it's so full of so many different types of time slips and time portals. And it talks about the Bermuda Triangle and that kind of and cities, lost cities like Atlantis, those kind of things in time. Because sometimes people, I think it's interesting when people go into a forest or to a jungle and then they kind of walk into that portal. I think that that's kind of interesting. The woods, I've always felt really, I think this is why I love Island Park so much, because I just have always felt like it's just so sacred. It's just such a place. I don't know. It just feels the frequency is just awesome there for me. So there you go. I totally, if you know anything about me, you know, I totally believe this is, but what I want you to do is take what you believe, take what you feel like, you know, what resonates with you and go with that, because this is all about your journey and you figuring out what works with you. But I just find it really interesting that these happen all the time, especially in forests or in different places that there's just different. I mean, some women, some there, you know, can walk out. There was a story, she just walked right out into her front porch and she was in a whole different time route. So these stories are really cool. I could sit and tell you the stories all day, but I really feel like if you're interested, you can go find them. You can Google them. You can look, you know, get this book. The book will be in the show notes and below. But I do want to mention too that H.G. Wells is the first person that talked about the time machine, and I think he made a movie about it. And it's interesting because, you know, Back to the Future, I think it was the DeLorean car was a time machine, and scientists or physicists. I always get psychic senses mixed up, but they believe that it is possible. It just takes a lot of energy and a lot of and that's the key is trying to find that, you know, in scientific realm, that energy that gives us enough energy that we would be able to do that. So I would be interested if you believe in this time warp thing or this time travel thing. And if you are, comment below. Or if you've had any experiences, you can send them to me at Carrie, C-A-R-I, at carriemuggs.com, CARIMUGZ.com. And I would love to share them with our listeners, because to me, it's just, it's to me, it's as fascinating as the UFO, UAPs, and which are UFOs, and Bigfoot and all things paranormal, just kind of. And this one does go into like the ghosts and things like that, because, you know, you never know if what you're seeing is somebody from a different time or if it's an actual haunting. So love you guys so much. And next week, we're going to talk about psychic attacks and if they're real, and if you think that maybe somebody's got the evil eye on you, or what you do if you think that it's, you know, because we do know there is a spiritual war going on. There is. And if you, you know, sometimes if you are meant to do good, some people try and stop you from doing that. And just little things like looking, you know, jealousy, things like that can instigate a little bit of a psychic attack. So we're going to talk about that next week. So if you have any questions about that, DM me or email me or put a question in the comments. Love you guys so much, and I will see you guys next week.